Hello, and welcome to another episode of eDiscovery Chicks, the podcast about all things eDiscovery and legal tech. Hosted by two gals who are ready to put forensics on trial today. Anyways, we are your hosts. That's Bree.
And that's Angie. And today you're right, we are talking about forensics on trial. And if you know us at all, you know how much we love criminal cases and we love forensics. So we are excited to bring a guest today. We're very grateful to have her here. You guys are in for a treat because she is a true expert and she has so much knowledge in her brain that me and Angie's heads might have both exploded the first time we talked to her. But we met her at the Techno Security Conference, which is another reason why you guys should come join us because there's amazing people there speaking just like our guest.
Our guest today is Melissa Kimbrell. Melissa, we are so thrilled to have you. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners so that they fully understand and appreciate all of your forensic expertise and the glory that is you?
Sure. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Melissa Kimbrell, as you said. I am a trainer and technical support specialist for Amped Software. We're a forensic video analysis software company. I've been here 3.5 years, maybe. And before that, I worked for the Texas Department of Public Safety in the Crime Laboratory in Austin, I hired in doing photography, and then I added also doing video and audio analysis during my almost 10 years that I worked there.
Incredible. You have such an amazing career path and so many sources for your expertise.
I've been in a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different environments, so I'm very lucky.
You are, and we are so lucky to have you. So I know that Bree loves to do an icebreaker with all of our guests. So Bree, I'm going to pass the baton to you to introduce today's icebreaker since this is really your bailiwick and I love to be along for the ride. I'm just going to passenger princess you while you do this.
All right. Well, thanks for the handoff, partner. So you guys have already heard our weird hobbies that we have going on. We have Angie who likes to collect and shine rocks. We have Bree, Bree who likes to watercolor on her couch drinking martinis. So, Melissa, I would love for you to share with us maybe one of or two of your hobbies. What do you enjoy doing when you're not hard at work?
One of the things I love to do is jigsaw puzzles. It's a really good way for me to turn my brain off when it's been busy with work. Put on a good audiobook or something and then just puzzle away. But lately I've been really into laser engraving, which sounds like a weird niche hobby, but I've been doing all kinds of fun things. I made myself earrings. I've been etching tumblers and making all kinds of fun crafts. I
That
like
is
to be
so
crafty.
cool. Do you see the world through a different lens now? Like everything can be potentially have something engraved on it?
Oh gosh. Every time I go anywhere with my friends, if I see something, I'll say, "Oh, I can make that." And they hate that. They hate it.
The world is your canvas.
Well,
Uh-huh.
you and Angie could get together. You could engrave her rocks. That
Ooh,
would
I
be
could.
kind of cool.
You can engrave things and I'll make my wine cork art. I feel like we're all kind of like of a vintage where we're starting to get into these like fun little weird hobbies. I feel like everybody's got one. I've got a friend who paints rocks. Like everybody's got something and it's
Oh,
so delightful.
my husband's like all of a sudden Farmer Joe. Like he has bell peppers and celery and jalapenos growing on the back porch. He tried to grow potatoes and they were an absolute fail. And I think he was depressed for like a week because
Oh,
he had like
no.
researched them and nurtured them and did all the things right. And they
For his
were so
emotional
dead.
support potatoes.
Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah. It did not
Oh,
work out for him. Poor Joe.
bummer. He'll get over it. Anyway. Okay, so let's move on and start diving into the meats of today's episode because Melissa, I cannot wait to pepper you with questions again. I want to start by framing today's topic, which is, from deepfakes to courtroom admissibility, how do we know what's real anymore? And I feel like this pops up, in our day-to-day life and then also in these more formalized contexts. I recently was on Instagram and I saw a video of a bunch of bunny rabbits jumping on a trampoline, and I cannot adequately convey the devastation that I felt when I realized that was an AI video and not real life. With that introduction, Melissa, I think we should start by talking about, just like video evidence 101. I don't know, Bree, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and by
Starting
the
place.
way, I think I saw the same video, but it was raccoons, and it was hilarious. jumping on the trampoline.
I know. And I was like, but this is why the internet exists.
Right. These are also other things that we now find amusing that we would not have if we were our younger selves. But anyway, I digress. So, Melissa, the first time that we ever met you, we actually started talking about this, and the three of us got so intertwined in conversation that we knew immediately we had to have you on the podcast. And it only took us 2 years to get here. So, I know that your passion with forensics is really has to do a lot with admissibility. And you can't really, I mean, if you are a true forensic examiner, you have to keep that in the back of your mind at all times. But what would you say? And I say this from a very e-discovery focused perspective, because I know sometimes I define things one way and somebody in forensics might define it another way. As we get started, why don't you give us your working definition of what forensic and admissibility means in your world?
Yeah, well, with video or with any kind of digital forensics, it's a little bit different when it comes to evidence integrity, right? And being able to trace that chain of custody. Because if you have something physical, like say, I don't know, there was a beer bottle at a crime scene that was collected, right? The crime scene tech will sign that into evidence, and then it will have a chain of custody all the way along. And you can follow that, and then that evidence can later be admissible in court because you know where it was all along the path. But digital data is a little bit different because it can change along that path. So even if you have it documented where it went, if you don't have it truly documented that it stayed the same, then it can change whether or not that evidence really can be admissible in court. So a lot of proper handling of evidence is really the paramount importance with digital evidence.
Yes, and we are familiar, at least our flock is familiar with chain of custody. That is a topic that we've talked a lot about, and I've been
Freeze
accused
catnip.
of I've been accused of maybe thinking it's my most favorite topic. So, talking about forensic versus e-discovery perspectives. I know that earlier this year we had guests come on and talk about deep fake videos and how crucial this issue really is today, especially because we have a jury looking at videos now, wondering in the back of their mind, is this even real? So, what does it mean from a forensic perspective to view a video versus, or collect a video and view a video versus an e discovery person who might just be watching the actual video to document it for evidence? What do you do? How is that different?
It goes down to how that video is acquired and if there's documentation of the actual acquisition of that video. So if it's something from a surveillance system, for example, or from a body camera or something like that, there would have to be some kind of documentation that it was collected from that device, and perhaps some kind of integrity verification like a hash value, which is a algorithm that is applied to a file. It essentially is a digital fingerprint of a file. And that way it would, you would always be able to refer back and say, well, if this hash code is the same, then this file is the same that was acquired. So that kind of takes away from that, oh, it's not me, that's a fake video. Because if the acquired file matches the one that is being displayed in court, then you know that it's not a fake. As far as deepfakes in general, it's a really complex thing that's happening where it's just becoming more and more prevalent. And it's easier to disprove than to prove, right? So it's easier to say this is not a camera original than it is to say this is a deep fake. So typically, the authentication approach when you're trying to verify if a video is real or not is to work your way back to it. Could it be from a camera at all? Do we see the little breadcrumbs that would tell us that this is a file from a camera or a recording device versus something that was created by a computer?
Yeah, and you touched on something that I want to point out to our listeners because a lot of times people think forensics has nothing to do with e-discovery and vice versa, and there's so many things that overlap in our worlds. So one thing Melissa just mentioned as the fingerprint or the thumbprint of a video is the hash value. That's the same as e-discovery. That's how we know when we are deduping or taking out duplicates within our e-discovery databases. We're looking at that hash value to identify the true original document so we don't actually collect it twice. But anyway, I am now going off on the eDiscovery trail. And Angie, I know you have questions to ask.
But that is our bread and butter, right? So, okay, Melissa, I know that you have testified several times in various iterations. At one time, the evidence that you were supposed to be presenting on was actually thrown out. So, can you explain what happened there and what that teaches us about the risks of admissibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I uh, was called to testify to another examiner's report because she had left the agency. So, my old department's policy was if somebody has separated from the agency, when the evidence needs to go to trial, you have a choice of either having it reworked, having the technical reviewer testify instead. So they opted to have me come testify as the person who reviewed the technical process when the case was worked. When I went to testify, though, the defense objected, saying that it was hearsay evidence because I didn't work the case. And so the evidence was thrown out, and I didn't get to talk about the process at all. Um, but this, as I said, was the policy of my former employer. So it happens all the time that technical reviewers go to testify about the technical process. And there really was no reason that that should have been thrown out. But I think in that case, the prosecution wasn't prepared to defend the evidence in that way. And so it just was thrown out.
Which is so interesting to me because, I used to be a prosecutor and we would have stuff come in from like the state toxicology lab or something like that, and it was very rare that we would have the scientist who actually like performed that forensic test be the one testifying. It was much more likely that whoever was on call that week to testify for the state. And so for me, I'm like, yeah, no, there is some groundwork that has to happen there. You have to prove it's a business record and that it's, sufficiently reliable and all these things. But it's such a shame when that goes awry and you have all these state resources or other resources that have been sunk into this examination and then somebody just doesn't quite do the groundwork. So, I guess where I'm going with that is if you could give us lawyers one tip to avoid that pitfall, what would it be?
Have pretrial conferences with your witnesses. I think that I probably, in all of my testimonies, I would say probably only 50% of the time did I get an opportunity to have an actual pretrial conference with a prosecutor or the defense if I was called by defense. Well,
Wow.
defense was more likely to want to talk to me in advance if they were calling me. But a lot of times I think the prosecutors are just spread too thin and they
Mm.
don't have the time to meet with every one of the witnesses. And so a lot of times they're flying blind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I never even thought about that, but that's a high percentage of not having that pretrial conference. I can't imagine.
Another thing that I think is really helpful, one attorney that I worked with, she really had everything, all her ducks in a row, and she actually drafted a list of questions that she thought she might ask me just so that I could fill them out and get them to her so we were kind of on the same page because she told me she was going to be too busy for a pretrial conference. So we basically used this questionnaire as kind of the basis for what we would have talked about if we had the opportunity to have a conference. And I loved it. I kept those questions and then I try to adapt those questions to every time I'm going to testify and I share them with other attorneys as well. And I think that that helps too to educate the attorneys on maybe the topics they didn't know they should be asking about.
That's an excellent pro tip. And,
Yeah.
something I've learned in working with forensic examiners is please involve them as early and as much as you can because there's so many things you don't know unless you know. I've been shocked at, additional devices or additional data and other things we had to pull in just based on the knowledge of my forensic examiner that nobody even considered at the initial onset of the matter. So, speaking of that, going from the crime scene to the courtroom, dun, dun, dun. Walk us through the entire workflow, Melissa. When do you come into play? When does somebody in your position come into play in a matter? And what are the different granular steps that you take along the way?
Sure. So say there was, I don't know, an incident in a gas station or something, for example. Typically the crime scene tech or somebody from a law enforcement agency will go to the scene, and as part of the evidence collection process, as they collect physical evidence items, they should also check for whatever kinds of recording devices might be present, whether it be surveillance. Maybe there was a car parked outside that had a dash cam running, or maybe there were people recording on their cell phones. If something happened, they should be looking for all of the sources of video or image evidence as well. That should be a part of it. And the collection itself can be tricky and difficult and not the same, because while there are standards for video, there's no requirement that says people have to abide by them. So every surveillance system you approach is going to be different. There's no one way to work it. But once you acquire the evidence and bring it back to the lab, then you're going to be faced probably with an issue with proprietary video, because as I said, there are standards. There's no requirement for anyone to abide by them, and everybody wants you to buy their thing and only their thing. So they make their file type specific only to be playable in their thing, right? Which is not great for anyone except for them. Having the ability to convert a proprietary video to a universal playable format is really important. And being able to do that in a way that doesn't sacrifice any of the data is even more important. So having a tool that properly parses the data and extrapolates what all the information that you can use within that file would be the next step. And then from there, you'd have to go through maybe you have hours and hours and hours, or days, even if you don't know when a crime occurred. You have all of this footage to go through. There are tools out there that you can use that are, maybe motion detection tools, or there are some smarter kind of tools that can parse for people or vehicles or something like that through the data to try and help narrow it down. At that point, you might need to clarify something. Maybe the vehicle drives away and you can see the vehicle, but you can't read the license plate. You might be able to clarify that license plate. And throughout that whole process, then you can make your court exhibits, right in forensic tools a lot of the time, and make your presentation pieces, your timelines, your video compilations, however you want those to be. The goal is to make something that will help the trier of fact understand what happened at the scene, because none of us were there. The video is the closest we can come to being there. Then you would generate a report that documents everything that you did, because as I've kind of alluded to, this video is basically like, they used to use the term a lot, the silent witness, right? Because it's seeing the scene, but any slight changes to the way the video is interpreted can change the way the trier of fact's interpretation of it as well. So all the parameters need to be documented. Everything should be reviewed by another qualified examiner. And then you would present it in court. Ideally, that's the goal. It always makes you nervous to testify in court, but really that's the whole point of doing any of this, to speak for the evidence itself.
Well, and I think it's awesome that forensic software, some of it anyway, has the ability to create the exhibit straight from the software. That's something our eDiscovery software has been missing for a long time, in my opinion. I think that it's interesting too, when you're sitting on the witness stand, you're just talking about that's the goal, like that's your end game. It's interesting to hear the difference between somebody who's, a pedestrian, somebody who's in legal versus somebody who's in forensics testify. And in my experience, it's been very black and white, stick to the facts. You don't need to talk about intent or motive or any of that. What would you say that you're thinking about? Like, what's going through your head when you're sitting on the witness stand? What is important for you to portray?
Oh, I think there are different levels for sure. When it comes to video analysis, there's kind of what we call the technician level. So that would be most of what I described, collecting, converting, enhancing, those types of things with your video evidence. Then there's another level that's typically considered the analyst level. And that would be people who are doing comparisons. Is this vehicle that we impounded the one from the video? Is this shirt that we collected at the scene the same as the person in the video? Things like that. Myself, I did not testify at the analyst level, so I was always testifying at the technician level, which is very similar to what you were saying. It's very black and white. It's, I did this, I did this. The video shows this only from a factual level, not from an interpretation level. So basically, relying on the video technician to assert what things are reliable and not reliable within the video itself, and not make any interpretation about any of the action that takes place in the imagery.
So you've done an excellent job of walking us through the very beginning of a matter all the way to in the courtroom. Where in that process do you frequently see obstacles that come into play or areas that need improvement where they're kind of more mistake prone, either on the forensics or the e-discovery or legal side of things? Where would you say those areas are?
Say I was going to testify in a vehicular homicide case, right? Maybe the analyst ahead of me is a chemist who went to school for chemistry, who, that's very well known as a science for sure, and they're going to sit up there and say, my instrument gave me a report. The report says this person was intoxicated when they drove the car. And the jury's going to say, cool, chemistry, got it, science. So then I come up and I say, let me talk to you a little bit about the video. And everyone's thinking, well, I have Instagram. I can make a video on my phone, right? So I think that in general, there's not quite the understanding of how technical video and other digital forensics can be, just because it's so much more accessible to people. Most lay people are not doing chemistry for fun on the weekends, but they might be taking videos of their kids playing soccer or something. I think that a lot of the problems that arise when analyzing or presenting digital evidence, a lot of the problems arise from people not understanding the depth of the actual science and keeping it very surface level when really there's a lot of depth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask me how a camera works, like I use my phone camera, I don't know, 17 times a day. And if you ask me how it worked, I'd be like, I have absolutely no idea. I don't
What are
know.
you recording 17 times a day? Is that what the number that you just used?
Probably not 17. I take a lot of like kid photos, cat photos.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I'm definitely following you on Insta.
Oh, I don't post them. I feel like I'm sort of a recluse on
Oh god. She's got a secret life, guys. You heard it here first.
yeah, no, you're right. So, Melissa, can you tell us about some of the tools that you use to bring evidence from its source material into the courtroom? What tools do you use to make that happen?
Well, I'm a little bit biased because I work for a forensic video analysis software company. So we are able to have a part in most of the steps between that crime scene and the courtroom. Once you acquire your footage, which you do outside of our tools, we have a program that just is a proprietary video converter, DVR-Conv. We have one that is also converter and a player with a few other functions called Replay. We have our most comprehensive video analysis tool is called FIVE, which stands for Forensic Image and Video Enhancement. And then we have a separate tool called Authenticate that does image and video authentication. So those are the tools I'm using almost all the time now, and I used them in my previous job as well.
Yeah. I know that a lot of times meaning you guys, the forensic investigators, and then you bring it to us. But when we look at a video, it oftentimes points to other facts in the case. Do you have any examples in real life, IRL? I'm so millennial right now. Um, do you have any
Now I'm
real
embarrassed.
I know. Do you have any examples in real life where the video itself has pointed to other evidence that helps solve a crime?
Oh, yeah. I can think of two off the top of my head. As part of my job at Texas Department of Public Safety, I was also on the crime scene response team. So a lot of times we would go to process a crime scene, and then if we were lucky at the scene, they would let us view the video. And that would sometimes change the way that our investigation progresses. But one example was we responded to a shooting scene in a trailer park, and the trailer park was not very well maintained. And some of the little decks and awnings were falling apart. And we worked our way in, assuming these things were just in general disrepair. And then once we got inside the residents, we gained access to the surveillance camera that they had on the trailer. And the detectives who were present, they watched the video, and we saw that actually the assailants, or, the subjects, they ended up, when they were retreating after this incident, they actually tore down all the parts of the external decking, and they left a mask that one of them was wearing in the yard, and we just thought that was general trash. So we changed the way that we processed, and we were able to reprocess the deck, and then we collected that mask. And so it definitely changed the way that we were considering this whole residence after
Leaving a
viewing the
mask.
video.
Rookie mistake.
That's
Yeah.
I
right.
remember the first time I committed a crime. No, I'm kidding.
Well, it's funny because we started this season with, if you're going to commit a crime, leave your phone at home. So now you also need to take your mask with you. That's the
Take your
other tip.
mask with you. Yeah, don't
Pro
leave it
tip.
at the scene.
Oh my God, that's funny. Melissa, when we were prepping for this episode, we talked a lot about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. So can you refresh our listeners about what that trial was, and then how interpolation and pixels factored into the video evidence in that case? And maybe we should define those terms, and I'm going to pass that baton to you because I am certainly going to do it incorrectly.
Sure. Kyle Rittenhouse trial was a really big landmark case, I think, in the world of video evidence admissibility and evidence handling and disclosure. There were all kinds of issues with this case. It was maybe in 21 or 22, but I think it had happened a little bit before that. This individual, Kyle Rittenhouse, at the time he was just 17, and he went to this area of Wisconsin that was having rioting. He went because he was a cadet with the fire department, and so he thought he could help give medical aid to people who might need it while he was there, but he brought a rifle with him. And then throughout the course of this evening, there are several video sources, including a drone video. And throughout this evening, he ended up shooting 3 people, I believe, 2 who are deceased and 1 is injured as a result of that incident. So, and he immediately turned himself in. He said, "I just shot some people." But the whole thing was that he was claiming it was in self-defense. And so all of this video became really important because the people that he shot couldn't speak for themselves, right? So we have to either take his word for it or analyze this video and determine whether there is enough evidence to say that you could assess an intent, right? Whether he was acting in self-defense or acting intentionally. So the reason that this became so important is because, well, there are a bunch of reasons, like I said, but one reason is when the prosecution gave the video evidence to defense, they didn't disclose it to them in a way that maintained that digital integrity that we talked about earlier. And so a lot of the pixels ended up different.
So, how does that happen?
Yeah, so when you resave something in a different way, it's a process called transcoding. And so if you break that down, trans meaning change and code is code. So if you change the code, right, you're changing the way that the data is saved within the file. So it ends up not being the same as the pixels were in the original. Because of that, the prosecution would say, you can clearly see in this video, and the defense is saying you can't clearly see anything because they got a much worse quality copy of the video than what prosecution was working with. So that was one big part of it. And the other part was that when the prosecution was trying to show the drone video to the jury, they're showing it to them on an iPad, and they were using the pinch to zoom into areas of the imagery to show the jury larger. And when you resize something, it uses that term interpolation that you brought up. There's tons of really technical and mathematical definitions of what interpolation means, but I like to think of it like this. This is my to the jury definition, okay? You have 2 known things. In this instance, they can be pixels, but they could be times, they could be motion vectors, they could be anything. You have 2 known things, and there's space in between them. So you need to come up with something to fill that space. And you can't just invent it. It has to be mathematically derived, or there has to be some other proven, documented way to fill in the space in between your two known things. So when you resize something, you're making the pixels more spread apart. You're not just making the pixels bigger, right? That's maybe what people think you're doing, but maybe if you zoom in, you're making pixels bigger. But if you're resizing, you're actually changing the number of pixels that you have. So those two pixels that were next to each other before are now not next to each other anymore. And we need to have a way to fill those empty pixel spaces in.
And
And
what
so
is a pixel?
a pixel, yeah, I use that term a lot, and I didn't tell you what it is. So a pixel is the smallest element of an image. So it's actually the words picture and element kind of jammed together. Pixel.
I never knew
Um,
that.
I never knew that either.
there you go. So if you zoom in really far and you start to see just little squares, that's what a pixel is. And so each pixel will have a numerical value. And that's how we create images in the first place, is because each pixel will have a different value. And then our eyes interpret those different values to make shapes and colors and things like that. So, yeah.
Interesting.
So the whole thing with the iPad then was, when you pinch to zoom, what kind of interpolation method are you using? And that was a question that nobody could answer. Because of that, they don't know what kind of math, if it's math or if it's AI. They didn't know what was being used to fill in those pixels when they're zooming in. And therefore, they didn't know that the information that the jury was seeing was reliable. And that was the
Mm,
big deal.
Oh my God, that's
interesting.
so interesting. Typically, if you were to resize something, you're spreading the pixels out. And is there
Mm-hmm.
AI that will fill in that interstitial space
Mm.
with
Mm-hmm.
with stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. There are all kinds of AI resizing algorithms out there, and it just fills in what it thinks you want there.
Okay.
Interesting. Wow.
Reliable. Okay, so say you're looking at a photo or a video and somebody says, "No, that's a deep fake." How do you prove or disprove that?
Yeah, that's where the authentication process comes in. So there are several different approaches. The first thing I would do is just an overall visual inspection, because a lot of times the AI imagery will fail the visual inspection. Like, hands are weird, eyes are weird sometimes. Deepfake images are not very good at those things. I mean, they're getting so much better, but a lot of times they fail that first step. The next thing would be to analyze from the back end. So looking at file structure and looking at the metadata, which is the embedded information within a digital file. You would look for the kinds of tags that come with a camera original, try to see if you can find those tags, and if you maybe see other tags that are indicative of editing software, or sometimes you'll see tags within the metadata that show some type of AI. A lot of tools now are putting the prompts and things like that in the metadata. And then after you've looked at the backend, then you can look from the pixels, and you can do some global analysis, looking for things that affect all of the pixels in an image to see if anything stands out as odd. And then you can look locally at different areas of your image to see, is there something that is not consistent with the rest of the pixels in the frame. And then we have other things to analyze deepfake specifically, like a deepfake detection filter. Or the other thing that deepfake imagery is not great at yet is physics. So things like shadows, reflections, perspective, those kinds of things are also pretty inconsistent in deepfake imagery. So if you can analyze things like that, then you can build that defense of whether this image is a camera original or otherwise.
That's so interesting. And I know that's going to come into play so much more in the future. Were you say something, Angie?
Yeah. Oh, I was going to ask. So you mentioned tags that say if something is like a camera original or if there are tags that suggest AI. When you say tag, what do you mean? Like, what are you looking for and where are you finding it?
It's typically in what's called EXIF information, which is, there are standard EXIF tags that are included in camera originals. So, make and model, create date and time, modify date and time. Those kinds of things are standards. that are included in original images.
And
Uh,
when you say make a model, you're talking about like the camera that took the image, right?
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
It's kind of like
And
metadata, yes, like in
yes,
eDiscovery standards, but yeah, very
yes,
similar.
yeah. EXIF is going to be a lot of metadata, but then the EXIF will also show if there are different Photoshop leaves specific tags. If somebody were to edit something in Photoshop, it would show in the EXIF data. And it's basically just a method of reading the metadata. Yeah.
Gotcha. So if you were to go in and something was like a deep fake, or something that generated wholly by AI, it might be lacking those fields that you would expect to see on a camera generated image.
Yes, absolutely.
So when we were talking about this episode and planning all these years that it took us to do this, no, but you mentioned tools like looking at ghost plots and diffusion models and face scans. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. What is cutting edge right now, and what's actually usable in a courtroom?
There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things you can do for image and video authentication. As I mentioned, our tool has, between the image and video side, maybe 50 or so things that you can do. And that's because we've used the things that have been the most tested and the most mathematically validated in the authentication space. And so we really pride ourselves on using things that can be legally defensible at every step of the way. The GAN detection that you mentioned, and then we also have another diffusion model deepfake detection filter. Those do have to use a type of neural network in order to detect an image generated by a neural network. So that is the only exception that we have to the mathematically verified tools, but it is with a neural network that we train in house, and it doesn't learn from the evidence that's fed into it, and it doesn't learn from anywhere else except for what we train it in house. That's the only not mathematical part of our tools, but everything else is just based on those pixel values and different techniques we can do by analyzing what maybe different qualities an image might have been saved at before.
So has it been your experience that judges now are trusting these tools more than they have in the past, or are they still pretty skeptical?
I think everybody has a healthy amount of skepticism right now, which is why I think it's so important to always have a forensic report that backs up everything that you did.
Well, I, for one, am so glad that people like you exist because the amount of math that we have discussed during this episode is more math discussion than I've had in the last 10 years of my life combined.
And you've been dealing
So
with Brie math for a while now too, so that's even more confusing.
that's my speed. Brie math is my speed. What do you think is the timeline for courts, lawyers, and even juries catching up to these tools? I mean, how soon do you think these deep fake admissibility fights will kind of become standard fare, or is that already happening?
At this point, it's fairly easy to authenticate whether things are or are not altered in some way. A lot of the "that's not me, it's a fake," that just isn't cutting it. But as things get more and more advanced, which is why we're constantly researching and trying to develop new methods and trying to source other information that's out there. We have a very strong research and development area in my company, and we're always hoping to stay as caught up as possible, but technology changes so quickly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We've often called it roping the wind on this on this podcast, which is very Texan. So I know that we are kind of wrapping up here, Melissa, and thank you so much for being here today. I would love to hear number one, how did you get involved with this in the first place? Like what in the world were you smoking? um, and also the second question is if we've got a listener that's listening that's like, oh my God, this is so cool. I so want to get in this industry tomorrow. What advice would you give them?
There are a handful of ways that people get to be in video forensics. Sometimes your department just has too many people doing computers and mobile devices, and they say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you're the video guy. Or it's someone that started in IT. And so the detectives were always saying, I don't know, this video doesn't play, send it to the IT guy. Maybe he'll figure it out. And then he becomes the video guy. or you might come in the way that I did, which is through the photography route. So I knew a lot about how images are captured and how cameras work and how pixels store data, and then they ultimately said, "Well, video is just pictures that move, right?" And I said, "I guess." So that's so then I started doing
the,
video
t-
analysis. So
the
there
talkies.
yeah, yeah, basically. Um, so there are a lot of ways to do it. If somebody wanted to now, there are definitely some media forensics programs out there. I know for sure there's at least one master's media forensics program, and I know that there are lots of other things that are in the woodwork out there. So I would encourage people to look into programs like that, but also attending educational conferences is a huge thing. I think when I attended my first forensic conference, it like opened my mind to how many things were out there.
Hmm.
And I really would encourage people to do that if you have the means and the availability to do it, because I think that's a tremendous resource.
Yeah, we're always bragging about the Techno Security Conference, and I love that that conference has really embraced the cross collaboration between all of these legal tech-ish disciplines. But it's kind of it goes down the route of e-discovery, of forensics, of security, and you learn so much. So anyway, there's my little plug for Techno Security Conference.
I love
Um,
it. And we'll be
yeah,
there next month. So,
yay!
very exciting stuff. Okay, well, I think that's about all the time that we have today. So, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you. You are a wealth of information. I now know what a pixel is, so that's incredible. Uh, well done. And we talked about math. Like, great, great news.
You
Uh,
consider our
so,
minds completely blown.
so thank you for being with us today.
Of
Thank you
course.
so
Thank you so
much.
much for having me.
Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us on eDiscovery Chicks. We hope you learned something new, felt empowered, or just had some fun. Join the flock by following us on LinkedIn and Instagram, and check out our website, ediscoverychicks.com. If you loved this episode, share it with your network, leave us a review, or tag us on our socials, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Bye!
Bye.
Bye.
The views we've expressed today are the eDiscovery Chicks views and don't necessarily represent the views of our employers, partners, or clients. The podcast is available solely for educational purposes to provide general information about eDiscovery principles and not to provide legal advice to any specific situation. It is not a substitute for legal advice from a lawyer you retained or who has agreed to represent you.